Good afternoon and welcome to today's presentation, Top 8 Things You Can Do to Get Yourself in Trouble with Technology. Before we begin our presentation today, I would like to take a few moments to go over some housekeeping items. We will be recording this webinar, and this webinar is CLE approved, and we will be asking that you enter a passcode for CLE credit a few times throughout the presentation. In today's webinar, Ms. Ellis and Mr. Siegel will discuss issues that can occur while using technology, steps that should be taken to ensure security while using Wi-Fi, email, and the cloud, confidentiality, routers and firewalls, technology risks while traveling, choosing cloud service providers, and data security while using smartphones and tablets. To give you a little background about our presenter, Jennifer Ellis, she is an attorney with the law firm of Lowenthal and Abrams, where she practices legal malpractice and ethics. She also manages the firm's online presence. Jennifer is a frequent author and speaker and is recognized nationally for her knowledge on legal ethics. She speaks and writes on issues including social media, legal ethics, and technology for law firms. Jennifer wrote the book WordPress in 1 Hour for Lawyers and the chapter on social media for both the 2013 and 2014 American Association Solo and Small Firm Legal Technology Guide. Jennifer also serves as a law practice management consultant, where she helps attorneys improve the efficiency of their practices and assists with websites on marketing. Daniel Siegel is a practicing attorney and a full-time technology consultant. As an attorney, Mr. Siegel focuses his practice on trial and appellate court writing. He also handles workers' compensation matters and serves as a second chair for attorneys, working on matters that keep them up at night. He is the principal of law offices of Daniel J. Siegel, and as a consultant, Mr. Siegel works with attorneys and their staff to analyze their workflow. He helps the firm implement and use technology more efficiently while avoiding the technical jargon that can be a barrier to understanding and adoption. Mr. Siegel uses these skills in his role as a founder and president of Integrated Technology Services. For those of our attendees who require a code word for tracking purposes, the code word for today is technology. During the presentation, we will take short breaks, and during that time, we'll ask that you enter this code into the Q&A widget for CLE reporting purposes. The Q&A is located to the left of your screen. Please remember that if you're applying for CLE credit, you must log onto your computer as yourself. Also, please remember to complete the survey that will appear to the right of your screen at the end of the presentation. As a provider of CLE credits, we are required to have supportive information that you've attended, and in many states the survey is required. CLE certificates will be provided within 24 to 48 hours via email. Also, the PowerPoint slides can be downloaded from the resource list on the left of your screen. Ms. Ellis and Mr. Siegel welcome your questions. Please use the Q&A widget to submit your questions throughout the presentation. We will take intermittent breaks so that the presenters can respond. Thank you all again for attending today, and Jennifer and Daniel, the presentation is now turned over to you.
Thank you so very much. My name is Jennifer Ellis, and I'd like to thank TASA for having me. I'd like to thank Dan for joining me. Dan, why don't you say hi?
Greetings, everyone. Thank you for attending.
So what we are going to do today is we're going to talk with each other and with you about issues relating to technology and how you can get in trouble with technology and how you can keep out of trouble as well. So the underlying theme throughout our ethics rules nowadays is that you have to be competent with technology. There's always been a requirement that you be competent, but the rules didn't specifically say technology, and this is Rule 1.1. And it began this movement to make certain that the rules focused on technology with the American Bar Association Ethics 2020 Commission. And they wanted to create amendments to the rules of professional conduct which would address technology and its impact on the law. And what they did is they created a change to the comment, and the comments are important, of Rule 1.1, which deals with competence. And it says lawyers must keep abreast of changes in the law and its practice, and the red part is what they changed, including the benefits and risks associated with relevant technology. So it's really, really important as we go through this seminar that you understand that the fundamental way you can get in trouble is by failing to appreciate those risks and benefits. Right, Dan?
Yeah. And, competency with technology often gets sort of misunderstood. It doesn't mean that you have to understand how the computer you're sitting in front of works or how this presentation somehow got from wherever it is out there on what's called the cloud to your desktop. It doesn't mean that at all. It doesn't mean that you went to law school to become a computer geek. What it does mean is that you should understand the technology for your practice. So that may mean if you run a solo firm, you should understand how firewalls and servers and those things work because they help you maintain your office. If you're a trial lawyer, it may mean that you need to understand the issues of how social media, which is an aspect of technology, impacts your practice, or whether there is software that will help you do a better presentation than perhaps the old ways of having a little cardboard design of wherever the incident occurred. So the reality is that you're using technology. The competence means use technology and understand what matters for your practice. And if you're not tech savvy, as most people aren't, then it may mean that at times you need to either have an IT person or a consultant or someone to whom you can refer, because you must have that knowledge in order to be competent. You wouldn't want to go to a doctor, and if people have ever heard me speak, you've heard me say, you don't want to go to a doctor who would say, I'm not going to use those newfangled MRIs because they weren't around when I was in law school. Well, when most of us were in law school, most of this technology didn't exist, but it doesn't mean that we can ignore it. You're responsible, you have to take care of it, and that's what competence means.
I agree 100%, and I'm brought to mind of a case that's going on in New Jersey right now, Dan, involving social media, where a paralegal friended the opposing side, the opposing client in a case, and the lawyers have been brought up on charges for that, and the lawyer's response to this was, well, one, we didn't tell the paralegal to do it, and two, we don't understand how social media works. And given what you just said, clearly the court was not interested in the fact that they didn't understand how social media works. First of all, you have an obligation to manage your staff, ethically speaking, and that means you have to manage them and make sure they're appropriately trained when it comes to technology. And second of all, you have an obligation to understand. So if you're going to use the technology, you've got to understand how to use it. And as you said, Dan, there's some technology you just have to use, and I think that would include computers in general, and these days email and, electronic legal research. You can't get away with doing book research anymore. There are all these sorts of things that you have to use, and for social media, I think that a lot of the time, if you're not aware of the rules behind when you may and may not communicate with people online, and when it's crucial to look at potential evidence and how you access it. For example, if you're a personal injury defense lawyer, insurance defense, and you're not looking at the publicly available information on someone's social media account, you might be committing some malpractice there, because the reality is that people post all sorts of harmful information that disagrees with what they say publicly to the court or to their lawyers or to you. So they might, for example, say, well, I'm too depressed to leave the house, and then they're posting about going to parties on social media, right, Dan?
Yeah, and lawyers have to understand that there is guidance out there. You're not alone in a bubble. Most state bar associations have committees that often provide guidance. So in Pennsylvania, you have the Pennsylvania Bar's Committee on Legal Ethics and Professional Responsibility, which has issued a number of opinions dealing with all forms of technology and ethics. The Philadelphia Bar Association Professional Guidance Committee has, as have bars throughout the country. So the first thing people should be doing, if you're not sure, is to see whether your state bar or your local county bar has provided you with some guidance so that you understand, yes, whether you can or cannot friend the opposing side, which is nothing more than you can't have any communication electronically that you couldn't have in person. But lawyers sometimes don't realize that most of the rules dealing with technology are simply applying the rules as they applied to the days before we had it.
Absolutely. If the rule is the rule offline, the rule is the rule online. If it's a law offline, it's a law online. Let's get into the meat of this. Let's talk about some commonly used areas of technology. Wi-Fi, wireless connectivity, is something that most of us use. You're connecting at home, you're connecting at Starbucks, you're connecting when you're at a hotel. The problem is that there are a lot of risks, and I see there's a typo on this, the major risk with wife. That's another issue. The major issue with Wi-Fi involves confidentiality. It's very easy for people to hack, or not even have to hack very much, but very easy for people to see what you're doing on Wi-Fi if it's not secured properly. And based on what Dan and I have explained, before you use Wi-Fi, it's your job to, again, understand the risks and take reasonable steps to mitigate them. So where can you get in trouble? Dan?
Yeah, you can get into trouble in lots of different ways because Wi-Fi by itself is just communicating sort of, I'll put it this way, in the air. So you need to take reasonable efforts or reasonable steps to preserve confidentiality. Just like you wouldn't leave one of your client's files or an important contract sitting in your lobby of your office. Wi-Fi sort of affords you the ability, if you just are in a public Wi-Fi, a Starbucks, or you're walking through a shopping center, that's not the place to be looking at client information. You have to take reasonable efforts to safeguard the information. It depends on what you have and what you're doing. I always use the example that if I'm traveling, when I'm accessing my office or anything client-related, I don't use the free public Wi-Fi networks. I use what's called a hotspot. Why? Because if I use a hotspot, which is a device you purchase from either Verizon or Sprint or AT&T or any of those companies, you have secure Internet access. But if I'm going to watch a movie or something and I want to download it in the hotel room, then I'll use their free Wi-Fi because that's free, and the hotspots you pay based on the amount of data you use. So the bottom line is think about all of those things. They're not hard to implement, Wi-Fi security, and you shouldn't be dealing with client information over free or sort of what I'll call the public non-confidential airwaves any more than you would just, we hope, discuss client information in an elevator, just like you have the signs in the hospitals. Doctors, please don't discuss patient information there. Wi-Fi can be sort of the same type of thing.
Absolutely. And as you're thinking about confidentiality, which is yet another issue that is involved with pretty much everything you do related to technology, I'm sure you've heard the stories, guys, about websites being hacked and malware that's sitting on websites and huge holes on the Internet. You have to remember that the Internet was not created to be secure. It was created to share data. So what's been going on is people have been plugging the holes over the years, and because there's so much money to be made in hacking and identity theft and stealing of data and hiding data from people, that there's a whole industry behind stealing data. So it's really, really incumbent upon you, as soon as you're starting to get on the Internet, put stuff in the cloud, and use Wi-Fi, to appreciate the importance of the confidentiality. And there are some factors that you have to take into consideration when you're looking at what steps you have to take to secure the confidentiality of your client's data. So what are those factors? Well, how sensitive is the data? Sometimes you don't want to send something via email. We're going to get into email in a little bit, but it's not that secure. So sometimes, it's better to send it in the mail or send it via fax as opposed to an email. What's the likelihood of disclosure? How meaty is this stuff? How likely is it that somebody's going to want to share whatever data it is that they find? And how much is it going to cost you? If it's going to cost a fortune to implement the safeguards and you're a solo, chances are that you're not going to be expected to implement those safeguards. But if it's not going to cost much, then you're going to be expected to do it. And how hard is it? Well, that kind of comes with the cost, obviously. If something's very difficult to implement, again, you're not going to be expected to do it barring working with extremely confidential information. If you're doing stuff related to HIPAA, though, you're probably going to be expected to take much more extraordinary safeguards. And also, how much is it going to interfere with your ability to represent your clients? If it's going to essentially make it so that you just can't communicate with your clients and can't provide proper representation, you're not going to be expected to do it. So let's talk a little bit about Wi-Fi. A huge mistake that you can make is failing to secure your Wi-Fi because it's inherently insecure. As Dan said, it's kind of like getting stuff over a radio, and it's just kind of out there in the air. So if you don't secure it, hackers can easily access your data. It doesn't take much effort to see what's streaming through Wi-Fi. Credit cards have been stolen over the years because people have been sending data back and forth. Companies have made the mistake. I remember a few years back, I'm not going to say the name of the company, but a few years back it was taking credit card information through Wi-Fi, and everybody's Wi-Fi got stolen. So that's a serious issue. So you've got to secure your client's data, and that means you need to secure your Wi-Fi. So how do you do that? The first thing you need to remember is that your system is only as secure as your weakest link. By that I mean that if you allow your staff to access their computers through GoToMyPC or whatever from home, you need to make sure that they are obeying whatever policies you have, and they should be written policies related to security at home. And that means you're going to have to require that your employees secure their Wi-Fi, and you're going to have to make sure they're using passwords and following all these sorts of rules. So security of Wi-Fi is a huge part. A common weak link at home or out of the office is going to be your computer, your phone, and your tablets, many of which will be accessing things over Wi-Fi. And again, both you and your staff include a written policy. You also want to make sure you provide assistance. Some of this stuff can be a little bit complicated, and therefore it's going to be incumbent upon you to make sure you provide whatever tech support is necessary, whatever software is necessary, and maybe even whatever hardware is necessary to make sure that your staff and you will be able to secure your Wi-Fi. So how do you secure your Wi-Fi? Well, most people out there are probably getting their internet access at home through Verizon or a Comcast or something along those lines. And most of the time that comes with a router. And the router frequently these days will have encryption automatically turned on for you, and that's great. But there are steps you can make it more secure. The router, by the way, that's what lets your computer, your tablet, your phone, whatever, connect to the internet through your provider. So the first thing you need to do is turn on encryption. Encryption simply takes it so that the data that is going across the internet or going through the air, essentially, is not accessible to the average person. So you need to make sure the encryption is turned on, and that's the first step. There's
Jennifer,
different types of encryption. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, one thing, because it actually arrived in the mail today, but there's a brand new book out, Encryption Made Simple for Lawyers, came out from the ABA Law Practice Division. It's just been released by David Reese, Sharon Nelson, and John Simic. And it's a very nice, very readable book that talks about how and why lawyers should use encryption, but without any sort of technical jargon. And the authors are about probably three of the premier experts on security you'll ever read.
Yeah, they're all really good. Both Dan and I know them both personally and professionally. So a book like that could be very helpful, and I commend it to you. It's probably sitting in my mail when I get home. It'll probably be there. So one thing you need to understand is if you're working with an older router, if you bought your router 5-10 years ago, it's time to buy a new one because the standards of security have changed. In the old days, there was something called WEP. You can hack that in 3 seconds. So if you're using a router that's still connecting through WEP, time to get rid of it. The minimum standard is called WPA, and now we're moving towards WPA2. You may not have that. It's not necessary that you have it, but if you do, you should use it. So those are the types of security. Again, WEP, as it's called, WEP, not okay, no excuse. Go buy a new router by the time you get home. There's something called the SSID. This is the phrase you type in so you can connect to your router. It's essentially the password. You want to make sure it has a good password. It should have a mixture of uppercase, lowercase letters, and numbers. How do you get it? You can log into your router the way you log into your router is you need to look up something called your IP address for the router. You may know that an IP address is essentially the phone number for your website. So if my law firm is lowenthalAbrams.com, there's actually an underlying number that I can use to access that. That's the IP address. Well, your router has an IP address too. And if you don't know what that number is, you can just look up your router online. Go to Google. If you have a Verizon router, type in Verizon router IP address, and it'll tell you what it is. And you type that IP address into your computer that's connected to the Internet, and it'll show you your router. And then you can log into that router, and you can make any number of the changes that I'm recommending here. So one thing is you want to make sure your router has a good password, and if it doesn't, you need to change it. The other thing is you want to make sure the name doesn't make it clear what kind of router you have. Because just like you can look up the IP address for your router if you know the name of it, if the SSID name of your router is Linksys, well, now the potential hacker knows the kind of router you have, and it becomes all the more easy for him to hack it. You know, sometimes you'll see people with funny little names like FBI surveillance or something along those lines on their routers. You can make it anything you want. I wouldn't make it, though, your name or anything that obviously connects it to your home. It's better to avoid that as well. Just a series of numbers is always a good idea. You want to make sure you turn on your firewall. There's different kinds of firewalls. You want to think of a firewall much the same as a firewall in an apartment building or a series of townhouses, which essentially works to keep the fire from getting through the wall from one location to another. A firewall on your computer and on your router, they work the same way. They try to keep data attacks from going into your computer or into your router, and you want to make sure both your router and your computer firewalls are turned on. You want to think about where your router is located. Now, most people just think about the location of the router for purposes of connecting to it throughout their house. But you also want to keep the router so that there's not too much leakage. And by leakage, I mean you don't want people who are driving, down the street to be able to easily connect to your router. Because one thing that hackers will do is they will drive down the street. They will look for unsecure routers. They will try to break into secure routers. So if you can make it so that it's pretty much impossible to connect to your router because it's not seeable when somebody is, say, 30 feet outside your house, that's a good idea. Now, you can't completely get rid of it. There's always going to be some ability outside your house. But if you can minimize it by positioning your router wisely, that's a good idea. You want to change the settings periodically. Most people, they got their setup a year ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago, and they haven't changed it. So you want to change the password from time to time. You also want to check with your provider and see if there's been an upgrade. A lot of the time, they won't bother to tell you that you can get a new router for free. That's far superior to the old router. If you've been with Verizon for 7 years and you've had the same router for 7 years, give it a call to Verizon and ask if they can provide you with a better router for no additional fee. It'll be faster, too. So not only will it be more secure, but it'll be faster. If you're traveling for a long time and you don't need to be able to connect to your house when you're away, so you're not using GoToMyPC or whatever to connect to your home, just turn off your router. You don't want to leave your house empty and people be able to sort of sit there trying to hack in when nobody's going to be paying attention. So the next thing we want to talk about, and Dan, you already mentioned this a little bit in regard to public Wi-Fi networks and their safety and lack of safety. Why don't you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. And I want to go back at a couple examples that address this. Years ago, when hotels and conference centers were really primitive, you could actually log into other groups' meetings and everything else because they used generic passwords. Remember, public Wi-Fi is public, and they're designed to let people use them, so they're not designed to be secure. Most conferences post the password, and then someone with a hacker with the right equipment, and we'll talk about some of the equipment that gets even more sophisticated, can simply log your keystrokes, what you're typing on your keyboard or through your phone, and get your data. So, yes, it makes it easy for you to connect, but if it's easy for you to connect, it's easy for someone else to take and appropriate your data. So as I said before, when you're using public Wi-Fi, don't use it for anything that's confidential. And remember, people can see your keystrokes if they have equipment, and the equipment isn't necessarily fancy. The last thing on here is true. Hotel connections and those types of things, even if you have to pay for them, doesn't make them secure. That just means they're charging you for them. And what you want to do is still use those connections. Like I said, you want to watch a movie. You want to do something like that. Maybe you want to check your Facebook page. Fine. But if you're going to your office to review a contract or something like that, use a secure service. Nowadays, lots of cell phones have become hotspots, which means that you can use them to connect to the Internet. Most will connect 5 to 10 devices. But remember that if you're going to use those connections on a cell phone, it will drain your battery pretty severely. The hotspots that come with it, on the other hand, are much better. So we're going to go back to the slide about security risks, and I'm going to talk about these things in general. And I suggest you sort of Google Pineapple. And a Pineapple is a really low-cost device that sets up a fake Wi-Fi network or a fake Wi-Fi site. We saw this a couple of years ago at ABA Tech Show when David Reese, the lawyer wrote Encryption, his son, and John Simic, one of his co-authors, set up a Pineapple device, and it's really a device, it's not a fruit, in a meeting room that was filled with some of the most techie people you'll ever see. And 47 of them didn't realize that they had logged into the Pineapple, which looked like and I say looked like because they gave it a name that was either the Chicago Hilton or some name like that. And all of these supposedly tech-savvy people had been logging in to that network rather than a secure one, or rather than even the public one, and anything they were typing could have been stolen because the Pineapple allows you to capture keystrokes. Now, they were doing it for demos, so they didn't capture keystrokes, but the people who buy a Pineapple are typically not doing it just for fun. So be very careful with all public networks. That Pineapple example really opened a lot of eyes, and it was probably the best program I attended that year at the ABA Tech Show. So if you're going to use a public Wi-Fi location, remember a few things. You always hear about malware and viruses and all of that, and you think of that simply in your office. Well, malware exists for all devices, and you can find it on an iPhone, an iPad, on an Android as well. So you want to have protection both on your phone and your tablet. On your phone, you can often get it through your provider or through either like the Google Play Store if you're an Android person or iTunes. And the nice thing is that a lot of these products are actually free for mobile devices, and the free ones have advanced versions that you pay a few dollars for, but they're by the reputable companies who you've probably heard of that you use in your home or office. McAfee, Norton, Kaspersky, AVG, all of those companies have been creating software to protect you from viruses and malware for not only your traditional laptops and desktops, but for mobile technology.
And a lot of them will have a package so that you can just buy everything at once and use it on all your stuff. So you may actually have it and not even know it.
Yeah. And in your office, people don't always realize it, but for example, if you're a Comcast customer, Comcast, their business service provides, I believe it's 25 licenses of Comcast's Norton's Business Suite, which is a complete security suite, and it's a terrific value, and you don't pay anything more other than your monthly Comcast bill. And there's the personal version comes for if you have a home account. You can also create what's called a virtual private network, which will allow you to have your sort of own network that gives you an additional layer of protection. A lot of people get a little confused by VPNs, so if you're afraid of that or you're not sure, I still suggest have a hotspot with you. And the other thing that can become really important is disable automatic connections. Phones often by default in their settings and other devices will connect to any available Wi-Fi network. And that can be a real danger because you don't know who or where you're connecting with, and so you want to avoid that. American Express has been giving away free use of an app called Boingo, and Boingo does just that. It connects to any network around, and if you're not careful, you could be connecting to a major security risk. So don't use automatic connections. And there are apps for phones and tablets that will prevent that. I have one on my phone that knows when I'm at my office. It knows when I'm at my house, but it also knows that if I'm not near those areas, to turn off Wi-Fi completely and only enable my mobile connection through my provider, which is far more secure than a Wi-Fi connection. So those are all ways to address those issues.
And you already talked about, Dan, making sure you get a hotspot or a plan for your tablet or a separate MiFi, which is the device you see the person holding here. And just make sure that you change your password there because hackers will go after that stuff too, and you want to make sure you follow the rules for a good password with those sort of stuff too. Right, Dan?
Oh, absolutely. I have a variation on the hotspot that's there, and I've had it for years. And you pay for the amount of data you use, but whenever I'm out of the office, if I'm doing a presentation or something, if it's anywhere where I may need access, I have that, and I feel much more comfortable rather than the Wi-Fi. And I've had a few of those devices, and I strongly recommend them. To me, they're an absolute essential. The other thing,
change and all that.
Yeah, the only thing people should remember is that the generic password is typically password, PWD, or admin on all of those devices, and they need to be changed immediately. And you should be changing the default passwords on any devices that you have. And remember that ABC123 and password are the most common passwords. And unless you're using strong passwords in general, which are 14 to 18 characters, they can all be cracked in a matter of literally seconds or minutes with software that's readily available.
And I think it's important to understand not only is this an issue for attorneys, but it's an issue generally. If you keep your Wi-Fi open or you don't keep it secure and somebody engages in illegal conduct on your Wi-Fi, whether that's downloading music or downloading child pornography, you can end up arrested. And this has happened to an attorney who, luckily for him, his firm supported him and they figured out the truth. The average person, though, they're not going to figure out that it was some third party. And you're going to say, well, it wasn't me. But while there are ways to figure out that it wasn't you, you certainly don't want to be in that position, and neither do your clients. So you also want to mention to your clients that they should make sure to secure their Wi-Fi too, right?
Yeah, and you have to be careful. There have been businesses who've been sued over allowing people to use their networks improperly, and so you have to be very careful in terms of who you let use your network and who you provide passwords to. In most businesses now, we have our internal network, but at the same point, we also have Wi-Fi for people who come in that is completely separate and does not permit any access to any secure area in my office.
All right, so I think now it's time for questions, right?
Yes, and could all the attendees please type the passcode into the Q&A widget? Our first question is it a good idea to hire an ethical hacker to help you identify Wi-Fi network vulnerabilities?
You mean to Wi-Fi to check your own system? Well, I think I would say an ethical hacker. I'd say you just want to hire somebody to make sure that your system is secure. whomever that is. I think you just want to make sure you have a good IT person, whether that's someone on staff or someone who you hire on, an hourly basis or a flat basis or a monthly basis, to make sure to check out both your office and your home and to sort of give you a plan for making sure that wherever you're accessing your stuff, it's secure. So absolutely, I would hire an IT person and make sure that person is checking out security for you. There are businesses.
And one other.
Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, there's one other thing. If you are using VoIP, VoIP, Voice over Internet Protocol, for your telephone system, which means your phones go out over the Internet, you must monitor that as well. They are frequent targets of hackers who actually steal your phone lines and then use them, and your providers will charge you. On my system, there have been attempted hacks multiple times, and my security person who helps me with my network has come in and had to, we've augmented our passwords to prevent any problems. But you need to think about that as well. VoIP is a great way to have phones, but at the same point, it has security issues too because it's the Internet.
Right. And as we said, anything on the Internet, security issues. Other questions?
Okay, and what is the name of that app that Dan mentioned that disables the Wi-Fi?
There's a few of them. One is called, and I, of course, turned off my phone during to do the presentation, but it's either Wi-Fi Matic or I can look for the name. That's the one I use, and it is terrific, but I'm blanking on the name, and I turned off my phone. So I'll look for it in a second for you and get you that name.
Other questions?
This person just wanted to clarify, what was the name of the author and the title of the book, Re-Encryption?
Oh, okay. That is called Encryption Made Simple for Lawyers. It's from the American Bar Association, and it's David Rees, R-I-E-S, Sharon Nelson, and John Simek, S-I-M-E-K. But it's Encryption Made Simple for Lawyers, and like I said, it just came out. I just got it in the mail today.
Yeah, if it's not on the ABA website, I imagine it'll be there soon. Both Dan and I, as just so you're aware, are involved in the publications committee of the American Bar Association Law Practice Division. So that's how we know about the books, and we know these three guys quite well. Both I know them from years and before I ever became involved with the ABA. Other questions?
Okay, there used to be firewall hardware devices available. Is there anything like that now?
It's mostly, yes, but mostly you're going to go with software. That's pretty much how you're going to go nowadays.
It depends on what.
Okay, those
the
are all
larger
questions
your
we
office.
have. We will have another Q&A at the end of the presentation, so please continue.
Yeah.
Dan was going to ask
The only thing else, I still believe in using hardware as well. We have both hardware and software in my office, so we're sort of doing double duty here. So I would still suggest that you want to use or consider using both because in an office they're not that expensive, and that's just another thought.
Yeah, and it can't hurt. Belt and suspenders, it can't hurt. So let's go into the next issue, which email. Email, as I mentioned earlier, is not a secure means of communication. So Dan, why don't you talk to us a little bit about it?
Yeah, people have heard me discuss email and know that I just am a sort of skeptic of the security of email. Email is great because it's generally free, it's quick, and it's easy. And those are all the types of things that make email not secure. What happens when you send an email is it goes from your computer to another computer to another computer and eventually ends up at the recipient's computer. It stays and resides on all of those different computers, and it is virtually impossible to be anonymous. Similarly, if you have attachments, they're going to be saved or stored on all of those different computers. So email is not a secure method of communicating. The ABA back in 1999 decided that email was secure simply because we had an expectation of privacy. It just isn't, and I recommend that if you're sending anything of secure nature, when I represent attorneys who have ethical issues and things like that, we either password protect the attachments or we take appropriate measures to be sure that no one else can see the email or the attachment. Also remember that free email typically means that the provider is going through your email and scanning it. Google tells you that it's inconceivable that anyone would think that they're not scanning your email. Google makes 85% of its revenue from marketing, and it gets information by scanning your emails. And the licenses that you click just, oh, yes, I agree, for all of those free products typically are giving them the right to do a variety of things, including review all of your emails, all of the attachments, and potentially to publish them. So I strongly suggest never using free email. I think we're getting to a point where using free email for client communications may at some point be deemed inappropriate in terms of your ethics.
Absolutely. As you'll see from the slide here, and I apologize, I was jumping around a bit because I was trying to find the right slide. Google and Verizon, I think, has done it as well, but I know Google has. They were, through scanning email, someone just changed the slide on me. Through scanning email, they were able to find that somebody was exchanging child pornography. And so what they did is they were able to arrest the person. Now, I think we're all glad that a child pornographer is off the street. But the problem is that does tell us that this email is being accessed. And I personally think it is unethical to use these free email providers. Of course, the other issue is why are you branding Gmail? Why are you branding AOL? You're branding another person. So you're really giving up a great marketing opportunity. When you send emails, that's the most common form of communication these days. So every time you send an email, they're seeing the name of your firm or your business or, you know, the keywords you use or whatever. So it's better to purchase a domain name for $15 or less and use something like Office 365 or Google Business, which provide not only the issues, get rid of the issues with the free email and the scanning, but also provide you additional features such as being able to sync contacts and calendars and all those sorts of stuff. So there's really no reason to be using these free email services anymore. It's just not secure, and it's personally, I think, not ethical, and I think it's, you know, just not something that you ought to be doing. As far as email security, you need to talk to your clients about security risks. You need to tell, you know, in your letter or whatever you do, make it clear to them that there are the risks Dan was discussing, and you want to be careful what you're sending and how you're sending it. You want to be careful to discuss with them whether their accounts are private. A lot of people, they're going through a divorce and they're sharing an account with their spouse, or the spouse has the password. That's a problem. Or they're saving their passwords on their computers. These are all things you need to talk about. And if it's a work account, your work can access it. Regardless of whether it's an employment issue or not, folks should not be using their work accounts. You can recommend to your clients that they don't use free email either, and they set up their own domain name or set up something through Office 365. It's just not that difficult to do, and it's not that expensive, and for purposes of privacy, it's very important. Now, encryption is a way to deal with sending emails. Dan already said, and he and I both do this, if you're sending importantly private documents to your clients, it's best to turn them into a PDF or something else and secure it with a password. You could also use encryption. Encryption in email has not really caught on in general kind of communications back and forth. I think because there's a little bit of difficulty behind it, and you both have to have matched encryption and codes and all this. So it can be difficult. But as I said back when we first started, sometimes mail or fax or some other form of communication is the best way to go, simply because it's more secure. So moving on, now we'll be jumping around a little bit, so let me get to where we need to be. You want to watch out for misdirected emails. It's very easy to mistakenly send an email to someone else if you're using Outlook. you'll notice that different names will pop up. My name, Jennifer, is very common. I'm constantly getting misdirected emails for different Jennifers. So when that happens to me, I always notify the sender and then delete the email. This is a pretty famous case of a lawyer who had two people with similar names in her address book, and she sent an email about a confidential deal to the New York Times, the New York Times reporter, and it ended up on the front page of the New York Times. So you really have to be very, very careful what you do with your email. Any comments, Dan?
Yeah, the only thing I just want to point out is that when you're using email, you can do things if you're using Outlook, which most attorneys do, such as have a delay. I have a rule, which is an Outlook feature, so that any email I send is delayed 2 minutes from when I hit the send button. So in case I send it to the wrong person or think I did or forgot an attachment, I can do something about it. And to me, nothing is so urgent that 2 minutes won't matter. I also just want to go back to the question during the Q&A, and the product that I use to regulate turning on and off Wi-Fi on my phone is it's an Android app called Wi-Fi Matic. So Wi-Fi Matic, and if you search, the Google Play Store, you will find that product.
All right, so moving on from email, another area of serious concern these days is cloud computing. Cloud computing, you're storing the data elsewhere, and you're accessing it elsewhere. So, for example, if you're using Dropbox, if you're using Office 365, if you're using Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo Mail, these are all things on the cloud. If you're using things like Clio or Rocket Matters to do your law practice, organization, those are in the cloud. And many lawyers are using the cloud and don't even know they're using it. So you might use the cloud for email, data storage and backup. You might be using it for Office 2013, client access to data, all sorts of things. And we're very lucky because Dan happens to know quite a bit about the cloud, and he's going to talk to you about it. Dan?
Okay, thanks. Why do you use it? One, it can be very economical. It can be very efficient, so that if you're, depending on how you use it, people think of it just as storage, but you can also use the cloud where you have a provider who hosts, who keeps all of your software. It could be your case management, it could be your email software, and you can maintain fixed costs. You will know just how much it's going to cost you every month, and the provider is responsible for upgrading the software, taking care of security. So you can reduce your risks. And in your office, you don't need necessarily as fancy a computer. You can use basic computers to access it. So the cloud offers those types of convenience, plus, to me, it's 24/7 access. But on the other hand, just like any other provider you work with, you still have to do your due diligence. You wouldn't just hire someone to do anything in your office without checking them out. So you need to determine whether the provider has a track record of proper storage, whether they're secure, those types of things. And yes, ask the right questions, and you have to read the agreement. Because the end user license agreement, it's often called the EULA, E-U-L-A, is important because there must be specific terms in those agreements. Because unlike if you're storing your family vacation pictures on the cloud and something happens, that's one thing. If you're storing client data, your client data is owned by the client, not you. So your agreements have to say that it's owned by you. They have to provide information about what happens if you terminate the agreement, what happens in a variety of circumstances. Pennsylvania Bar, for example, has very good ethical guidance on this. We published an opinion, and you can read that to see all of the different things. That opinion is still considered one of the foremost in the country, that in Iowa, which provides a very good checklist, because cloud computing, just like anything else you get into, requires you to be diligent in terms of what you do and what providers. Now, for people in solo and small firms, years ago, you didn't have as many options. Fortunately, because of the market and the demand, more and more providers have terms, that are what lawyers need. And you have to think about that because one of the most common uses of the cloud now is for backup. And it is generally considered best practice that you should be doing an on-site backup of all of your data as well as an off-site backup. That way, if something happens and you can't get into your office, the building burns down, you can still access your client data or recreate your server from remote data. But if you lose access to the Internet, which happens, then you still have access to all of the data in your office. Those are just some of the things you need to consider. There's a wide range, and the Pennsylvania Bar opinion is one of the best.
So some of the things...
Yeah, go ahead.
Why don't you go ahead? So let's talk a little bit about privacy and some of the issues to talk about there, Dan, if you will.
Yeah. When I talk about the end-user agreements, I'm talking about, who has access to the information. Does anyone at the provider you're storing it have access? That's a big issue with Dropbox because Dropbox, which is very popular, but the people at Dropbox actually have access to the security key, and there's ways to deal with that. On the other hand, there are ways to use products like Box, SpiderOak, and Vivo to prevent, to encrypt your data so that even the people at Dropbox who have access and can't access your data. So you need to be thinking about all of those things. And then, as the other slide mentioned, where's the data being stored? Because if we go back 2 slides, you have to think about that because your data should be stored in the United States where you're covered by U.S. law and the U.S. Constitution. In different countries, there are different laws. And you also need to think about what happens if a subpoena is served for your data or served on the provider. Are they even going to notify you about they were served? Some companies simply say in their privacy policies, we're going to turn it over. Apple does, Google does. Microsoft actually says we'll give you 48 hours notice, which is far better than a lot of other providers. So you need to think about all of those things rather than simply just do what we all like to do, which is check the I agree box. And that's what you can't do because the difference here is this is client data. And, when you went to law school, you learned about confidentiality. It's the same thing. You're just storing it here rather than, in your office.
Let's talk next a little bit about portable equipment, which is an area that's pretty important. Most of us are using smartphones and tablets as well as laptops these days. And any technology that can easily travel or be easily stolen has unique considerations. And you need to be careful what you install on the device. You need to watch out for malware. And there are some things that you just need to focus on. For example, a really serious mistake is to fail to secure the stuff. Dan?
Yeah, you must have office policies about the use of these devices. Nowadays, where more and more firms allow people to bring their own devices, that doesn't mean that anyone can store anything on any device. If you're carrying secure information, I had a former partner who represented professional athletes. Well, we had him secure his, back then it was a Palm, for those who can remember that, because if anyone accessed that information, they would have all types of information about very prominent athletes. So you need a password, something that is secure. You need remote apps that will allow you to wipe your device in the event it is lost or stolen. Google provides them. There are lots of different apps that do it, both for the iOS, the Apple operating system, and for the Android. And Google, just so you know, has something called the Mobile Device Manager, which allows you to track all of your devices and to wipe them, and that's free. So you need to think about that. You should have your devices set up so that after maybe a minute, they automatically screen lock so that no one can access your information, because if you have them set not to lock, that means someone's going to pick it up and still have access. The last item there that says require location services to be turned on is essentially remembering that your device is a GPS, and so that's how they get tracked. And you need to keep that on, because that's what enables the various different security products to find the device and to wipe it. There are also products out there now, Lookout Security that's mentioned, for example, has a feature that if someone tries to access your device and puts in the wrong password, it will send you a picture to whatever address or text address you want of the person who did it, because it'll take a snapshot of that person from the device's camera. That's a good security feature to have. So you want to think about that, because security on these devices, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when many of us will lose or misplace one of those devices.
And therefore, you need to have written policies. You need to make it clear to your staff how important it is that they be careful with these devices. And by the way, you can set up laptops so you can wipe them as well. You can set up laptops so you can have location services for them. So you can do this stuff with laptops. The smaller the device, and this also includes those little thumb drives, which should be encrypted. The smaller the device, the more easy it is to steal, the more careful you need to be. And don't leave your stuff lying around. When I'm at CLE events, I'm amazed at the number of people just leave their phones lying around or the tablets lying around. That's access to your office. That's access to every piece of data you've got, assuming you're set up that way. And that's a really bad idea. And a lot of people don't have passwords at all, or their password is 1111 or 1234 or whatever. Make sure you have a good password, too. You shouldn't let your kids use it. This is your work device. I know we want to let our kids play on our phones or do this or do that. You shouldn't do it, because kids can access stuff. I had a friend whose kid kept calling 911 by accident, or they're buying stuff. But leaving that aside, they're getting into your private email. They're seeing things they shouldn't see. It's just not a good idea. And by the way, if you want to talk about the importance of security and proper encryption, just ask Jennifer Lawrence and her colleagues who were using iCloud, which did not at the time have the level of encryption and perhaps it ought to have had, and apparently there was a bug or something along those lines. Again, the more likely your client is to have information stolen, the more extraordinary efforts you must take to secure that client's data. Now, there are also issues with apps, right, Dan, that are inappropriate and can steal data, right?
Yeah, and many of us sort of take for granted when we have our mobile devices that we're just checking and allowing apps to do whatever their permissions. You have to read them. There was a flashlight app that turned on the phone's light so people could access, to be able to see in the dark. Well, that app and the developer got into trouble because they were actually tracking people's locations, et cetera, and got into trouble for doing that, because there's no reason that a flashlight app needs to do that. But more importantly, you have to be careful, because if you're not using an app that's been properly vetted through iTunes or the Google Play Store, you may be opening yourself to security risks. The other thing is there's something called jailbreaking, which means you take your device, it can be an iPhone, it can be an Android device, and you essentially remove the security and to make it operate faster, better. There's lots of reasons that people do it. It's also called rooting. You shouldn't do that with your devices. It will void your warranties. It can expose you to significant issues with malware. So don't jailbreak, don't root your devices. If you're going to purchase apps, do them from reputable places. The Play Store with Google, iTunes, Amazon for people who have Androids has an app store that's very good as well. But those stores screen all of the apps for malware, and you can also have apps on your phone that automatically screen apps as well when they're downloaded. So they're things to think about because they're very simple and really can help prevent the problems that, can land you into some hot water.
Yeah, Lookout, which was the security app I use on my Android, does the kind of screening you're mentioning. So that's our presentation pretty much. We've already talked about making sure you read everything and just some quick advice that Dan has already mentioned. So any questions?
And could the attendees please type the passcode into the Q&A once again? Our first question is, if you set Outlook to delay sending an email, i.e. 2 minutes as mentioned, then what? Can you recall within that time or cancel sending?
What happens is if you set the rule to delay sending email, and you can pick whatever time you want. I just use 2 minutes as what we do. What it does is it leaves that email in your outbox, and you'll actually see it display that you have 1, 2, or however many emails waiting to send, and then Outlook knows when to send it. You also can, with any Outlook message, most people don't know this, there's actually on one of the tabs the ability to do the same thing on any given email. You can delay it for 2 minutes, or I could say, I want to send this to Jennifer, but not till tomorrow morning. So Outlook gives you all of those features. They're built-in parts of the program, but it's just in the outbox.
Okay, and how often should a Wi-Fi password be changed?
I'd say every 6 months is fine.
And should the Wi-Fi name be changed as well, and how often should that be changed?
I think that your Wi-Fi name, as long as it doesn't really give any information, that doesn't concern me quite as much. But if again, you're in a situation where you are sharing extraordinary information that's likely to attract people, I would change it more often, again, maybe every 6 months. If you're really in a business or in an area of practice, or you have clients who are in businesses where they're likely to be targets, I think you have to step it up a notch and change things even more frequently.
Okay, and would you recommend any password management apps?
Last app is good. What do you say, Dan?
Yeah, there are a lot of good ones. I have used for years RoboForm because it synchronizes my passwords on every computer, every device. I think I pay $9.95 a year for that feature. There's other free ones. RoboForm is one of the sort of old reliables, but I have my passwords on every device, but I still have to have the separate RoboForm password in addition to my device password before I can see or access any of those passwords. And so I like it, and it's like anything. Once you've used it and it's good, I don't switch.
And I would say that's a password, the RoboForm password, that you would want to make sure it's very, very secure and that you change it somewhat frequently because obviously if someone's able to get into that, now you have a serious problem. Also, for people who feel the need to keep a list of passwords, look, there's some people who do that. If you're going to do it, make sure you encrypt the list of passwords and make sure it's not called password. A lot of people will have the word password in the file or name it the file or something like that. Call it something that isn't that, and please encrypt it.
Is there a security risk to use those password management apps? Like, can the app creator go in and see all the passwords that you've been using?
You want to make sure. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, you have to look, and you have to look at what the agreements are, what the licensing agreements are. There's no general rule, but you have to look at the licensing agreement or the terms of service to see what they can and cannot access.
Yeah, you want to go with somebody who has what's called zero knowledge. Zero knowledge means they don't have access to the password and they can't get it. If you lose the password, you have to go through a process to restore it on your own. And you want to obviously go with a legitimate company. And as I said, one of the risks, of course, is if that password gets broken into, they have the keys to the kingdom. So you want to make sure that's a good password and you change it frequently.
Okay, and how much does it cost to sign up for a virtual private network?
Oh, varies hugely, anywhere from free to, a lot.
What about using companies that send faxes to you or your computer email?
Well, there's the same risks of any email. If you're getting your faxes through email, and they're normally sending it in a PDF. If the PDF is not secured, or you're sending it to a Gmail account that's getting scanned or some other kind of account that's getting scanned, you have the exact same risks that you would with any other email.
Okay, this next question is, what about Norton's password management app?
I've heard of it, but I've never used it. Dan, have you used it?
I used it years ago, but I haven't used it. I'm sure it's probably very good because Symantec, which runs Norton, generally has very good products, but I haven't used it, so I can't really say.
It's probably fine. I mean, they have good products, generally speaking. Also, they have a site that's great for generating passwords. I use it all the time. If you search create passwords through Google, Norton has something that will help you generate passwords, and really good ones. You can choose how many letters and whether it's going to have exclamation points and other forms of punctuation included, and that's a great way to create passwords when you're looking for a secure one.
Should you change the standard password that is provided on the back of the router when it is set up by the internet provider?
Probably. I mean, the problem with that password is if somebody breaks into your house, they can just look at it and log into your router at that point if that's what they're after. So if you're concerned about that level of security, then yeah, you should change it. Again,
but you should also check with the provider to make sure that it's permissible.
Yeah, normally if you're going to be able to change it, you would have to log into the router itself and change it there. And if you can do that, normally it's not a problem. But you might want to check just to make sure it's okay. But normally you can. And again, you have to log into the router. And when you're logging into the router, that's the time you can change the username from admin to something else and the password from password to something else. And you can change the actual password of the router at that point in time. Again, make sure you use a good password, though. You don't want to use something simple.
Okay, those are all the questions we have, so we'll continue with the CLE information. This webinar is eligible for CLE credit in California, Illinois, Minnesota, Missouri, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Texas. To ensure that you receive your CLE credit, please complete the survey at the end of the presentation. This is a reminder that CLE certificates will be provided within 24 to 48 hours via email. In addition to being your best source for testifying and consulting experts, TASA also offers e-discovery and document management solutions, free interactive webinars, and research reports on expert witnesses such as the Challenge History Report 2.0, the Professional Sanction Search, and the Expert Profile 360. I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for attending, and most especially Jennifer Ellis and Daniel Siegel for their time and effort in creating this presentation. If you would like to speak with Ms. Ellis or Mr. Siegel, or if you would like to speak with a TASA representative regarding an expert witness for a case that you are working on, please contact TASA at 1-800-523-2319. This is a reminder that we will be sending out a link to you tomorrow with the archive recording. The archive recording will also be posted in the Knowledge Center on TASA's website. If you have any questions or comments, please email Carol Kowaleski. Thank you all again, and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.